The sun was setting as we approached the strategic pass, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I was a fresh-faced Marine, barely out of training, and this was my first deployment. The weight of my gear and the rifle in my hands felt foreign, but the determination in my heart was as solid as the ground beneath my boots. Echo Company had been tasked with holding this pass at all costs. It was a narrow gap between two imposing mountains, a natural choke point that the enemy would have to pass through to advance. I could see the outlines of hastily constructed fortifications, a testament to the urgency of our mission. As we settled in, our company commander, Captain Reynolds, gave us a rundown of the situation. "The enemy is expected to make a push through this pass within the next 48 hours, he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Our job is to hold them off and buy time for reinforcements. I won't lie to you, Marines, it's going to be tough, but I have faith in each and every one of you." That night, as I lay in my makeshift bunk, I thought about my family back home, my mother's tearful goodbye, my father's proud handshake, and my younger sister's promise to write every week. I clutched the photo of them I carried in my pocket, a tangible link to the world I had left behind. The first skirmishes started the next day. Enemy scouts probed our defenses, testing our resolve. The crack of rifles and the thud of mortar fire became the soundtrack of our lives. I experienced the chaos and horror of combat for the first time, the adrenaline surging through my veins as I returned fire and ducked for cover. In those moments I realized that war wasn't like the movies or the stories I'd heard. It was dirty, chaotic, and terrifying. I saw men fall, heard their cries of pain, and felt a growing sense of helplessness. But amidst the fear, there was also a fierce sense of camaraderie. We were all in this together, fighting not just for our country, but for each other. As the days passed, the attacks intensified. The enemy was relentless, and we were constantly on edge, grabbing sleep in short bursts between assaults. The pass became a battleground of mud, blood, and spent ammunition. But we held our ground, determined to fulfill our mission. One night, as I stood watch, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not by the enemy, but by something else, something unseen. I brushed it off as nerves, but the feeling lingered, a whisper in the back of my mind that this place held secrets far older than the war we were fighting. In the midst of this turmoil, I found a strange comfort in the routine of military life. The checks of my equipment, the patrols, the brief moments of banter with my fellow Marines. They were small anchors of normalcy in the chaos of war. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all standing on the edge of something much bigger, much more terrifying than any of us could imagine. The battle raged on with no end in sight, each day blending into the next in a blur of gunfire and grit. It was during one of those endless nights, under a moon that seemed indifferent to our plight, that I first saw them, the ghosts of war. They appeared at the edge of our camp, barely visible in the moonlight, figures draped in the uniforms of soldiers long dead, their faces obscured by shadows. I rubbed my eyes, thinking sleep deprivation was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, they were still there, watching us with an eerie silence. I nudged Martinez, my closest friend in the company, and pointed them out. He saw them too, his face turning pale under the dirt and sweat. Neither of us spoke of it that night, but the unspoken fear hung heavy between us. The next day, whispers of the apparitions spread through the camp. Some dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations, while others believed we were on hallowed ground, haunted by the souls of fallen warriors. I didn't know what to believe, but the presence of these specters added a new layer of dread to our already grim reality. During a lull in the fighting, I took a walk to clear my head, my path leading me to the makeshift graveyard where we buried our dead. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses, names hastily carved into the wood. As I stood there, a chill wind swept through the pass, and I could swear I heard my name whispered on the breeze. That night, the ghosts appeared again, closer this time. I could see the details of their uniforms, patches, and medals that belonged to a bygone era. One of them, a figure with a tattered Marine uniform, seemed to lock eyes with me, and in that moment, I felt a connection, a sense of understanding that transcended time. The following day, as we prepared for another assault, I felt an inexplicable calmness. In the heat of battle, as bullets whizzed by and explosions shook the ground, I sensed the presence of the ghosts around us, guiding our movements and shielding us from harm. It was as if they were imparting their strength and wisdom, giving us the edge we needed to survive. Martinez and I talked about it after the fight, our conversation filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "Do you think they're here to help us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or is this a sign that we're all doomed?" I didn't have an answer for him, but I clung to the hope that these spirits were allies, not omens of our impending doom. As the days passed, the apparitions became a familiar part of our existence, a ghostly garrison standing watch over us. Their presence was a double-edged sword, offering both comfort and a constant reminder of the thin line between life and death. One evening, as we gathered around a small fire, sharing stories and trying to forget the horrors of the day, I proposed a toast to our unseen guardians. "To the ghosts of war," I said, raising my canteen, "may they guide us through this hell and lead us safely home." The others joined in, the sentiment resonating with each of us. In this haunted pass, among the living and the dead, we found an unlikely brotherhood, a bond forged in the fires of war and watched over by the spirits of those who had walked this path before us. The days turned into weeks, and the relentless pressure of the enemy attacks began to wear on us. Amidst the exhaustion and stress, a new threat emerged, one that came from within our ranks. Rumors started circulating about a possible traitor in Echo Company, someone who was leaking information to the enemy. The first hint of betrayal came when our supply convoy was ambushed on a route that had been deemed secure. The precision of the attack suggested that the enemy had advanced knowledge of our movements. Tension mounted as similar incidents followed, each one pointing to the possibility of an insider working against us. Captain Reynolds called a meeting, his expression grim. "We have reason to believe that there is a traitor among us," he announced, his words sending a ripple of shock and disbelief through the company. "I want everyone to be vigilant. Report any suspicious behavior, no matter how small. We must root out this betrayal before it costs us more lives." The atmosphere in the camp changed overnight. Trust, the cornerstone of our brotherhood, was replaced by suspicion and paranoia. Marines who had fought side by side, shared meals, and laughed together, now eyed each other with doubt. Friendships were strained, and every conversation was tinged with a sense of wariness. I found myself caught in the whirlwind of accusations and counter-accusations. My every move was scrutinized, and I, in turn, began to question the loyalty of those around me. The ghosts that had once been a source of comfort now seemed to watch us with a somber judgment, as if mourning the erosion of our unity. The breaking point came when a nighttime raid on our position was thwarted, thanks to a last-minute tip from an anonymous source within the enemy ranks. The raid had been planned with intimate knowledge of our defenses, knowledge that could only have come from someone in Echo Company. The investigation narrowed down to a handful of suspects, and I was among them. Interrogations were conducted, personal belongings searched, and every aspect of our lives scrutinized. The pressure was unbearable, and I could see the toll it was taking on my fellow Marines, turning them into shadows of their former selves. In a twist of fate, the traitor was revealed not through evidence or confession, but by an act of cowardice. During a particularly fierce bombardment, one of the suspects, a Marine who had been with us since the beginning, attempted to flee, signaling to the enemy with a makeshift white flag. He was caught in the act by a group of Marines, his betrayal laid bare for all to see. The aftermath was a mix of relief and sorrow. The traitor was dealt with according to military law, but the damage to our morale was done. We had lost something precious, something that went beyond the loss of trust. As we buried our fallen and prepared for the next wave of attacks, I couldn't help but wonder if the ghosts that haunted us were not just mourning the dead, but also the innocence and brotherhood we had lost in the shadow of betrayal. In the aftermath of the betrayal, a somber mood enveloped Echo Company. We were still reeling from the shock, trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It was during this time of vulnerability that Captain Reynolds called me to his tent. The seriousness in his eyes told me this was no ordinary meeting. "Sit down, son," he said, gesturing to a makeshift stool. "There's something you need to know, something I've kept from the company for the sake of the mission." I tensed, bracing myself for another blow. Our stand here, at this pass, it's not just about holding off the enemy, it's a diversion. I felt a mixture of confusion and anger. "A diversion?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, all the lives lost, for a diversion?" Captain Reynolds nodded, his expression grave. "It's part of a larger strategy. While we hold the enemy's attention here, a critical strike is being planned elsewhere, one that could turn the tide of this war." The revelation shook me to my core. I thought of the faces of the Marines who had fallen, the sacrifices we had made, all under the belief that our mission was of paramount importance. "Why tell me this now?" I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Because I need you to understand the weight of what we're doing here," he replied. "I need you to trust me, even when things seem senseless. The success of this larger operation depends on us, on our ability to keep the enemy focused on this pass." I left his tent feeling a heavy burden on my shoulders. The knowledge of the hidden agenda changed everything. It cast our struggles in a new light, but it also added a layer of complexity to the already tangled web of war. I realized that our sacrifices were part of a bigger picture, one that we might never fully see. The days that followed were filled with relentless assaults from the enemy. But with the knowledge of the hidden agenda, I fought with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting to ensure the success of a mission that could end this war. As we repelled each attack, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere of Echo Company. The bitterness and suspicion that had plagued us after the betrayal began to fade, replaced by a grim determination. We were bound by a secret now, a shared burden that brought us closer together. In the quiet moments between battles, I would often find myself gazing at the mountains surrounding the pass, wondering about the larger operation that was unfolding beyond our view. I hoped that our efforts here were making a difference, that the lives lost and the blood spilled would lead to a greater victory. And so we continued, holding the line, each day blurring into the next, each battle a testament to the resilience and bravery of Echo Company. We were more than just a diversion. We were the unseen linchpins of a strategy that could change the course of the war. In the face of overwhelming odds, we stood firm, united by a secret that weighed heavily on our hearts, but also gave us the strength to endure. The war dragged on, each day a test of our endurance and will. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the battlefield presented us with a new challenge, one that defied all logic and reason. It began as a whisper of mist rolling in from the mountains, a seemingly innocuous harbinger of the bizarre turn our lives were about to take. At first, we welcomed the fog as a reprieve from the relentless sun and the ever-watchful eyes of the enemy. But as it thickened, swallowing the landscape in a dense, impenetrable veil, we realized this was no ordinary weather phenomenon. There was an otherworldly quality to it, a chilling presence that seemed to seep into our very bones. Communications were disrupted, visibility reduced to mere feet. The fog became our new enemy, an adversary that played tricks on our minds and turned the familiar terrain into a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty. In the eerie silence, the line between reality and imagination blurred, and I found myself questioning what was real and what was conjured by the mist. One night, as I stood guard, the fog seemed to come alive, swirling and shifting in ways that defied the natural flow of the wind. I saw shapes moving within it, forms that were human-like but distorted, as if the fog was a canvas for some unseen artist's twisted creations. I gripped my rifle tighter, my heart racing, as the shapes drew closer, only to dissipate into nothingness when they reached the edge of our camp. The days passed, and the fog showed no signs of lifting. We moved through it like ghosts, our footsteps muffled, our senses heightened. The strain of the constant vigilance, the fear of what lurked within the mist, began to take its toll on the company. Tempers flared, and nerves frayed, as the boundary between the fog and our sanity grew thinner. Then, one fateful day, the fog brought a vision that would forever change the course of our battle. In the heart of the mist, a figure appeared, clearer and more solid than any phantom we had encountered before. It was a soldier, but not one of ours. He wore the uniform of a bygone era, his eyes filled with a sorrow that transcended time. He spoke, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Beware the unseen enemy, for it is closer than you think." And with those cryptic words, he vanished, leaving us to ponder their meaning. The fog seemed to retreat slightly, as if the apparition had lifted a part of its veil. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of the spectral soldier from my mind. His warning haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I shared the experience with Martinez, who had become my confidant in these strange times. "Do you think it's a sign?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the same uncertainty I felt. We couldn't find an answer, but the encounter shifted something within us. We became more cautious, more aware of our surroundings, and the fog, with all its mysteries and terrors, became a constant reminder that the enemy was not just the ones with guns and bombs. It was also the unknown, the unseen forces that lurked in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. In this shrouded world, we fought not just for survival, but for clarity, for the light of truth to pierce through the fog of war. The fog eventually lifted, but it left behind a landscape altered not just in appearance, but in the minds of those who had endured its haunting presence. In its wake, a new kind of warfare emerged, one that targeted not our bodies, but our very sanity. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, with small, unexplainable occurrences that chipped away at our resolve. Radios would crackle to life in the dead of night, spewing forth eerie transmissions that were a mix of static and whispers, in languages none of us could identify. Our equipment malfunctioned in ways that defied explanation, compasses spinning wildly and watches stopping dead. Sleep, already a rare commodity, became fraught with nightmares that left us waking in a cold sweat, dreading the return to unconsciousness. The first clear sign that we were under a new form of attack came when visual hallucinations began. Soldiers reported seeing loved ones wandering the battlefield, calling out to them, only to vanish into thin air. Others saw enemies among us, spies and saboteurs that looked like fellow Marines, leading to accusations and fights that broke out with little provocation. I experienced it myself one dreary evening. I saw my younger sister Sarah, standing just beyond the perimeter, her favorite blue dress torn and dirty, her eyes filled with tears. She beckoned to me, and for a moment I almost forgot where I was, almost stepped out of the trench to reach her. It took every ounce of willpower to remind myself that she was thousands of miles away, safe at home. Captain Reynolds called a meeting, his face etched with lines of fatigue. "We're not just fighting the enemy's soldiers," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious strain. "We're fighting their attempts to break us from the inside. This is psychological warfare, designed to weaken our spirits and sow discord among us." The realization that our minds were the battlefield brought a new kind of terror. Physical wounds could be seen, treated, understood. But how do you fight an enemy that invades your thoughts, that uses your fears and memories against you? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a specter that loomed as large as the mountains that surrounded us. We implemented countermeasures as best we could, buddy systems to keep us anchored to reality, debriefings to share our experiences and reassure each other that we were not alone in our struggles. But the doubt, once planted, grew like a weed, its roots burrowing deep into our psyche. One night I found Martinez staring blankly into the darkness, his rifle discarded at his feet. "They're in my head," he whispered, his voice a ghost of its former self. "I can't get them out." It took hours to coax him back to clarity, to convince him that the voices he heard, the visions he saw, were not real, or at least not real in the way we understood reality. This new front in our war was the hardest to combat. The enemy was elusive, a shadow that danced just out of reach, striking when we were most vulnerable. Yet, in facing it, we discovered a resilience we didn't know we possessed. We became warriors of the mind as well as the body, fighting for our sanity with the same tenacity we used to hold our ground. In this war within a war, our bond became our strongest weapon, a shield against the darkness that sought to engulf us. The psychological warfare waged on us took its toll, but amidst the chaos, a discovery was made that shifted the course of our struggle. During a routine patrol in a less traveled sector of the pass, I stumbled upon an object half buried in the dirt. It was a small, intricately carved stone, its surface worn by time, but still emanating a faint, pulsating glow. Curiosity piqued. I showed it to Captain Reynolds, who examined it with a mix of fascination and wariness. "This could be something significant," he mused. "But we need to be cautious. We don't know what this is or what it's capable of." He decided to send it back to base for analysis, hoping that it might provide some insight or advantage in our ongoing battle. Days passed, and the artifact became the subject of much speculation and rumor within the company. Some believed it was a relic from a long-lost civilization. Others thought it might be a piece of advanced technology from an unknown source. The only thing we knew for sure was that its discovery coincided with a noticeable shift in our fortunes. The enemy's psychological attacks seemed to lose their potency, their attempts to infiltrate our minds becoming less frequent and less effective. It was as if the artifact was acting as a shield, protecting us from the unseen assaults that had plagued us for so long. Our morale boosted, we began to make small gains against the enemy, repelling their attacks with renewed vigor and confidence. The artifact, once a curiosity, was now seen as a talisman, a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of adversity. But with this new hope came new challenges. The enemy, noticing the change in our demeanor and tactics, intensified their physical assaults, determined to crush our spirit by brute force. The battles grew fiercer, the stakes higher, as we fought not just for control of the pass, but for the preservation of our newfound source of strength. Then, one fateful night, the true power of the artifact was revealed. As we braced for yet another enemy onslaught, the stone began to glow brighter, its light pulsating in rhythm with the sounds of battle. Without warning, it released a wave of energy that swept across the battlefield, creating a barrier that deflected the enemy's bullets and explosives. In the stunned aftermath, we realized that we had in our possession something beyond our understanding, a weapon or tool of immense potential. The artifact had chosen that moment to unveil its capabilities, turning the tide of the battle in our favor and leaving the enemy in disarray. From that day forward, the artifact became the heart of Echo Company, its presence a source of strength and mystery. We guarded it fiercely, knowing that it was both our shield and our sword in this unending war. In the shadow of its power, we fought on, the line between the natural and the supernatural blurred beyond recognition, our fates intertwined with the ancient relic that had become our unlikely ally. The days following the revelation of the artifact's power were a whirlwind of activity. We fortified our position, emboldened by the newfound advantage, while the enemy regrouped, their tactics adapting to this unexpected development. The pass, once a desolate battleground, was now a focal point of a conflict that had expanded beyond conventional warfare. Captain Reynolds, ever the strategist, devised a plan to leverage the artifact's abilities. "We'll bait them into a full assault," he explained, "and when they commit their forces, we'll unleash the artifact's power. It's a risk, but it's one we need to take." The company rallied behind the plan, our resolve hardened by the prospect of a decisive victory. The enemy took the bait, launching a massive attack that was met with fierce resistance from Echo Company. The battle raged with a ferocity that surpassed anything we had experienced before. Amidst the chaos, I clutched the artifact, feeling its energy pulsating in sync with the ebb and flow of the fight. As the enemy pressed forward, I unleashed the artifact's power, creating a barrier that halted their advance and inflicted heavy casualties. But the strain of wielding such force was immense, and I could feel my strength waning with each passing moment. In the midst of the battle, a strange calmness enveloped me, and I found myself slipping between realities, witnessing different outcomes of the conflict. In one, we were victorious, but at a great cost. In another, we were overwhelmed, the artifact lost to the enemy. The possibilities were endless, each one a thread in the tapestry of fate. With a start, I realized that the key to our survival lay in a single, decisive act. The artifact, while powerful, was not invincible. It needed a conduit, a sacrifice, to unleash its full potential. And I knew, with a clarity that pierced through the chaos, that I was meant to be that conduit. I made my choice, not out of a desire for glory, but from a deep sense of duty to my comrades, to the mission, and to the countless lives that hung in the balance. I poured my essence into the artifact, channeling every ounce of my being into a final, blinding surge of energy. The impact was catastrophic for the enemy, their forces decimated by the unleashed fury of the artifact. But the cost was high, for in that moment of triumph, I felt myself slipping away, my consciousness fading into the light. My last memory was of Echo Company, standing victorious amid the ruins of the battlefield, their faces a mix of sorrow and pride. I knew then that my sacrifice had not been in vain, that I had secured not just a victory, but a future for those I had fought beside. In the end, it was not the ghosts of war that guided me, but the bond I shared with my fellow Marines, a bond that proved stronger than the darkest forces we faced. As I embraced the oblivion, I did so with the knowledge that I had played my part in the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between life and death. In the echoes of that final stand, my spirit would endure, a testament to the courage and sacrifice of Echo Company, the guardians of the pass.